Okay, so have you heard this one? Someone actually suggested that Elon Musk, Mr. Tesla and SpaceX, could just buy an entire country.
I did hear about that, yeah. A little wild, right?
Wild is an understatement. But before we jump into that, for anyone just tuning in, welcome to our deep dive on this crazy idea, the so-called Musk Gambit.
Exactly. We'll be dissecting this scenario to see if it's even possible. And if it is, what it would look like.
Basically, could Elon Musk really buy country? And what are the ramifications?
Right, so this whole idea was sparked by Gambian entrepreneur Mustafa Manjang. He's also known as DJ Pisces.
Yeah, DJ Pisces, who suggested Musk could purchase the Gambia.
So before we get into the how, let's talk about could he even afford it?
Well, Musk's net worth is estimated at around, what, $250 billion, give or take?
Which is just an insane amount of money. Seriously, if you stack that in $100 bills, it would reach like halfway to the moon. Maybe not that high, but it's a staggering sum. And when you compare it to national GDPs, it gets even more mind-boggling. The combined GDP of the world's 29 poorest countries is less than Musk's wealth.
That's kind of terrifying, isn't it?
It really puts things into perspective, and the Gambia's GDP is just a fraction of that. So, financially speaking, Musk could, in theory, afford it.
Okay, but in theory is the key phrase here, right? I mean, it's not like you can just stroll into a country with a briefcase full of cash and say, I'll take it.
Exactly. It's not like buying a house or even a company. There's no international real estate market for countries.
But there is a history of territories changing hands. I mean, the Louisiana Purchase, the Alaska Purchase, those were pretty big deals back in the day.
True, but those were different times. Today, the concept of national sovereignty is much stronger. But even if you can't buy a country outright, there are ways to gain significant influence.
Okay, so how could Musk actually pull off a Musk Gambit? What would it look like in practice?
Well, one option would be through massive investments. Think pouring billions into the Gambia's infrastructure, industries, maybe even wiping out their national debt.
Which, by the way, stands at around $600 million, according to our research. A drop in the bucket for Musk.
Right. And that kind of financial power can translate into a lot of leverage. He could negotiate favorable terms for his companies, access to resources, maybe even influence over policy decisions.
So essentially, he could become the power behind the throne.
Potentially, yes. It'd be a delicate balancing act, because the Gambia would still be an independent nation with its own laws and government.
Right. They'd have to agree to all of this. And speaking of the Gambia, it's worth noting that this whole idea wasn't just some random internet meme.
Yeah, it actually came from a respected figure within the Gambia. DJ Pisces, the entrepreneur who sparked this whole discussion, is a well-known and influential person there.
So it's not just some outlandish fantasy. There might actually be some support for this kind of radical idea on the ground.
It's definitely food for thought. So let's say, hypothetically, that Musk and the Gambian government decide to explore this. What might that look like?
Well, I imagine it would start with some intense negotiations. What does each side want? What are their priorities? What are they willing to concede?
Exactly. Musk might seek things like exclusive rights to certain resources, control over key sectors like energy or technology, or maybe even special economic zones with relaxed regulations.
And on the Gambia's side,
They might push for guaranteed investments in infrastructure, education, healthcare, job creation programs, things that would benefit the entire population.
so a lot of back and forth, a lot of lawyers involved, a lot of paperwork. But let's say they managed to hammer out a deal. That's not the end of the story, is it?
Not even close. Because even if Musk and the Gambia reach an agreement, they'd still have to navigate the complex world of international relations.
Yeah, they'd probably have to get approval from the United Nations, the African Union. Other countries might have a say too.
Absolutely. And those international bodies would be looking very closely at the potential implications for the Gambia's sovereignty. Would this deal compromise their independence? Would it set a dangerous precedent? These are big questions.
So lots of potential roadblocks. But let's for a moment imagine that everything falls into place, the deal gets approved, Musk invests his billions. What happens next?
Well, that's where it gets really interesting. On the one hand, you could see a massive transformation of the Gambia's economy and society.
Like a real-life Wakanda situation.
Well, maybe not Wakanda levels of advanced tech, but definitely the potential for rapid development. Think widespread access to clean energy, a thriving tech sector, improved infrastructure, better healthcare and education.
That sounds pretty amazing. But of course, there's the flip side. What are the potential downsides?
Right. As with any major change, there are risks. One of the biggest concerns would be economic exploitation. Is Musk just trying to extract resources and maximize profits? Or is he genuinely committed to sustainable development?
That's the million, or in this case, billion-dollar question, right? And then there's the issue of political influence. Even if Musk doesn't directly control the government, his wealth could give him enormous sway over policy decisions.
Absolutely, that's a major concern. And then there's the social impact. Would this influx of wealth and development benefit all Gambians equally, or would it exacerbate existing inequalities?
And of course, the big one, loss of national identity and control over their own destiny. It's a lot to consider.
It's a complex web of possibilities and potential pitfalls, and ultimately, it's up to the Gambian people to decide if they want to go down this path.
And that's a decision with huge implications, not just for the Gambia, but for the entire world. Because if this happens, it could set a precedent for how billionaires interact with nations in the future.
Imagine a world where the ultra-wealthy can essentially buy influence or even control over entire countries. It's a pretty unsettling thought, right?
Definitely makes you think.
Mhm.
But even if this never happens, even if it's just a thought experiment, it raises some important questions.
Like, how do we manage this extreme concentration of wealth? What are the ethical responsibilities of billionaires? And how do we ensure that development benefits everyone, not just a select few?
Those are questions we all need to be thinking about. So what do you think? Is the Musk Gambit a bold vision for the future or a dangerous step towards a new form of colonialism? Let us know in the comments.
And while you're mulling that over, consider this. Could there be a middle ground? A way for someone like Musk to use his wealth to help a country like the Gambia without compromising their sovereignty or exploiting their resources? What would a truly ethical and sustainable partnership look like? Something to ponder.
Great point. And with that, we'll wrap up this deep dive. Thanks for joining us.
Until next time.